Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Zach, this is so fun. I am so glad this all worked out and we got to talk right away. This is cool. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, man, what a blessing it is just being able to get connected to you, just to hear a little bit more about yourself, your story and testimony, and just the message of hope that God has placed on your heart for such a time as this. I follow you on all of your social media accounts. I love all the content that you're pushing. Like I was just telling you before I pressed record, right? Not only are you helping the end user who's maybe wounded, trying to get beyond their past, but also you're helping the people helpers like myself who take your tidbits and love implementing them within their sessions with their own clients and patients and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to publicly thank you, let you know that I appreciate you, and all of us here at AACC appreciate your great work, man. As we begin, though, you're an incredibly gifted and experienced licensed therapist who has had the opportunity and privilege of working with thousands of individuals across so many populations over the years, ranging from individuals who are incarcerated to top CEOs, performers, and artists, and just about everybody in between. But excitingly, beyond your professional career as a therapist, you're also now the author of your brand new book that's coming out in just a few short weeks, titled Get Past Your Past, How Facing Your Broken Places Leads to True Connection. Jason, up front, man, why is this message behind and the heartbeat of this book so unique and so special to you personally?
I think I've lived it. Yeah, I think people always ask, why did you write this book? And I say, because I think this is the book that I needed to read when I was 20, because it would have saved me a lot of time and pain and struggle. And so how I kind of look at this is there have been so many people that have helped me along the way and really spoken life into this process for me. And so now that I wouldn't say like I'm perfect or in an amazing spot, but I think now that I'm in this healthier place, I just feel like, oh man, what would I want to tell somebody who felt the way I felt? What would I want to tell somebody who feels like they just can't break out of whatever it is they're struggling with? How would I make that accessible? I know for you, like you get it in the therapy world, we often talk about like doing the work. And I remember when I was just in the midst of it, I always thought like, what does that mean? Like, I'll gladly do the work. Just tell me what that is. And so I wanted to write this book that like actually told people what it looks like and made it accessible.
I love that. So actually doing the work, and in a sense, it's kind of like a letter that you wish you could have had to your younger self. Hey, if you could just implement some of these simplistic, practical things into your daily life, it'll help you live in that abundant life that God has always planned and prepared for us. Something that, I really love doing here on the podcast is just to try to get a better understanding of our guest and kind of how that message was fueled and ignited on their heart. I love understanding kind of the backwater, like going back. What was it? What were some of the experiences, some of the individuals that maybe shaped who you were? A lot of what you do in your book is you're very vulnerable about some of the challenges you've faced and some of the challenges you've endured, especially beginning back, right, to kind of a challenging and a difficult upbringing. Jason, if you would, could you just help our listeners and our viewers understand maybe some of those challenging times and how that really impacted the trajectory of your life, and also how the healing pushed you and catapulted you into the man that's sitting in front of us today?
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic question. And I think for me what it was, it's super interesting. Because I think I've always been a therapist at heart. And so as a kid, I would journal, and everyone hears that and they're like, yeah, that's Jason for you. Jason probably was journaling as a kid. But I journaled as a kid, and I still have the journal. And one of the things I wrote is someday I want to be a psychologist or a counselor, and I want to live in a city, and I want to help lots of people. Okay. Yeah. And so I wrote that because that was my dream. And then my parents got divorced. And so that was an amazing dream that I thought would just be like this linear path. Yeah. And then my parents split up, and they didn't split up in a way where they were friends after. They split up in a way where it was really messy. And so my life kind of went from, this is stable ground and this is what I'm planning for the future and I'm sure it'll happen, to nothing's really guaranteed. And the floor is kind of moving around. And so that led to experiences where there was abuse and addiction and trauma and just all these things as a kid you don't ever want to go through. Yeah. And so I think for me, what happened is my journal entry started to change, right? It started to be more in the vein of, this is not possible for you. You're not going to get these things. Life has changed, and it's not going to get better, and your job is to learn to live there. And so I think I did. I think because we're so adaptive and we are so resilient that I just learned to live in a space that we ought not to live in.
Yep.
And so I got out of my childhood and I thought, well, here's the thing. I'll just do the opposite of what happened. I'll just do the opposite of everything I learned, and then that'll be great. But what took me the longest time to learn is that the opposite of one extreme is another. And so, man, I wish somebody would have told me that. But I went and I basically just recreated the same life I came from because I was wounded and I didn't know how to get out of it. And so for me, this dream of like who I wanted to become, I didn't know there was going to be such a gap.
Yeah.
But what really started to change things for me was I took stock of where I was at. I was honest about it, and I asked for help. And probably what made the biggest difference is that I had some people in my life who were willing to role model some of the things that I had missed or didn't see. And then also just, I'll never forget, like meeting my good buddy, Bob Goff. I met him and I was kind of like, this is what I want to do, Bob. And he's like, okay, well, why wouldn't you? And just having some people, and I know God just placed those people in my life who just were like, well, yeah, I think you could.
Yeah.
It just started to change things for me because I was so stuck in believing that what was in front of me was all there was. And to have those people, and I think, man, if we only wanted to look to the Bible, maybe Jesus, God mentions something about this. There might be like some loose reference to you're called for more. But in my life, there were just people who started to say like, well, I think you ought to do that. Like, I think it could be different. And so for me, that led me down this path of becoming a therapist and helping other people is, how do I help other people see that?
That's right. I love what you're saying there in terms of, sometimes our past, they can be so discouraging, they can be so disappointing. We can find ourselves kind of stuck or wallowing in that pit, right, of self-pity in certain ways or that victim mentality. And then just kind of, like you said, succumbing to it and saying, oh, you know what, I'll be resilient in this and I'm just going to face life the way that it is right now because I'm not sure if it'll ever get better, right? We kind of lose that sense of belief, but then having people that come into your life and that can speak life and speak encouragement and speak hope over you, reminding you, right, of your purpose and the potential that is bestowed within you can be so game-changing. And that's why, I love the opportunity, right, of being a counselor and a therapist and being able to be that for somebody in the moments of need where it's like, man, I see so much more in you, you know what I mean? And you have what it takes. So let's get you to step out of that. I love a quote that you mentioned in the preface of your book, where you kind of began the preface, the whole entire book. You're talking about that very difficult, challenging moment in your life when it was like there was a fork in the road and you had to make a decision of which way were you going. But you're quoted saying, eventually, with the help of some friends and therapists, I addressed the wounds from my past that had been pulling the strings all along. I learned that some of the problems I was facing weren't new ones, but old ones in disguise, kind of like the bad guy in every Scooby-Doo mystery. I had to add that in because I loved Scooby-Doo as a kid, man.
Me
I really
too.
did. So I chuckled when I read that.
If I'm writing a book, there's going to be a Scooby-Doo reference, man. I'm not writing a book and not putting that in there.
That's it, man. But let's be honest here for a second too, Jason. It's one thing to identify, right, the wounds of our past. It's another thing to actually dig them up and actually try to embrace and explore and express them in a healthy way. Jason, for you and your personal but also your professional experience, why do you think it's so hard for us to dig up the wounds in our past?
I think we just don't want to go there. When would you like to schedule time to be uncomfortable? When would you put that on your calendar? Most of us would say, well, never. And can I keep bumping that? And so I think the thing is, because we are often very adaptive and resilient, we just find a new way to live in the stuckness. And that seems better than facing it and being uncomfortable. Now, what's true is facing it being uncomfortable, even in that moment, that will help avoid discomfort in the future. It just doesn't feel that way. So we kind of do this thing that I talk to clients about where it's like we have this credit card mentality. We go, like the bill's going to come due sometime. Sometime I'll have to pay for that. But right now I'm just going to keep making the minimum payments. And I'm just going to keep living in the moment. And while that feels good in the moment, ultimately it creates a cycle that's very hard to get out of.
That's right. And it makes sense then, like you said, when we have that mentality of, man, we get stuck in the pattern or in the cycle of it. And like you keep on mentioning, we are very resilient. We'll just keep pushing and plowing our way through, especially I think of, people that have a sense of competitiveness. They'll do whatever it takes to just make it through life. You know what I mean? Rather than trying to actually live in the abundant life that we're talking about in John 10:10. There's a story in one of my favorite movies growing up, right, is Lion King. And I have to throw this in here because I think it's very applicable to what we're talking about, where Simba and Rafiki are together out in the wilderness. And Simba's kind of prepping, he's kind of planning for, going back to Pride Rock and seeing all of his old friends and his past in a sense. And he's quoted saying, "I know what I have to do, but it means I'll have to face my past. I've been running from it for so long." Very serious moment. And what does Rafiki do? He takes his stick and he literally thumps Simba over the head with it. And Simba's like, "Dude, what was that for?" And Rafiki, "Oh, don't worry about it, man, right? It's in the past." And Simba said, "Yeah, but it still hurts." And Rafiki said, "Well, yeah, that's what I'm trying to help you understand here, bud, right? The past can hurt, but what I've understood is that you can either run from your past or you can learn from your past." Some of our listeners and viewers today, Jason, they don't understand the mere fact that the past isn't in the past if it's still affecting the present. For you, you teach a lot about the importance, again, of embracing the past and our brokenness in order to move forward and step into the abundant life we were created for. Why is this so essential for us? To confront our brokenness and actually look it in the face to then begin this healing journey.
Because I think it allows us to live an intentional life. And I think often an easier life than the one we're living. And I think if we're at all interested in changing our legacy, so if we've come from woundedness or brokenness and we want to change that legacy, we just can't do that without looking at it. And so the challenge for people is that if we go to the doctor and the doctor says, "Hey, what's wrong?" and we say, "Well, I think it's this, but you can't look at it," it's not going to get better. And our life is the same way. And so if we don't look at it, what happens is we just have these, like you said, patterns and behaviors that we replicate over and over again, almost unwillingly, because it's just so much of what we know, when the reality is we're called to more. We're called to that intentional life where we do look at this, and this isn't always popular, but I really believe, at least my experience was, we really find our truest connection with God in those broken places. Mm-hmm. That's not something I want to volunteer for. So I'm not saying like, "Hey, God, give me some hard stuff," because that sounds great. But I'm saying in those moments where we do face that brokenness, I think what most of us will find is that the connection with God is even more present than we felt before. We're not alone in that.
Our listeners have heard me say this, and it goes right along with what you're saying. In our moments of powerlessness, God really loves to draw us closer to and reveal the character of his heart, right? That's who our God is. He's in the midst of our brokenness with us. He's not just an authoritative figure that's allowing bad things to happen to us. He's actually in that midst experiencing it alongside of us. And I think that's a huge perspective shift, that when we recognize that that's who our Father is, that he's faithful even when we're faithless, it can kind of change and shift the entire atmosphere of our lives. For you, though, Jason, in understanding this is a difficult process. Like when we actually confront our past, it can look very messy. It can be very difficult and very hard. For you, in terms of self-compassion and grace, and self-acceptance, how imperative are those things within the process? And what does it look like to even offer ourselves those things when we're confronting our past?
Yeah, that's really that's a tough thing for a lot of people. But I think what's true is we don't repair what we don't value. Yeah. And so if we can't value ourselves, it's going to be really tough to do the work, because it feels like, why would we do that? Mm-hmm. And so if we can get that from God, and we have it and we know that, if we're not giving it to ourselves, what is it that we know that God doesn't? Right? So I'll talk to clients, and I think they're often very annoyed with me. They're like, "Come on, Jason." But I'm like, "So I just want to understand, like, God gives you all that stuff." And they're like, "Yep. I'm like, "But you don't." Like, "No." And I'm like, "Okay, so what do you know that God doesn't know? What are you aware of that God hasn't caught on to yet?" And so I think sometimes one of the hardest things for us to do is to really accept that from even God or other people in our life, is just that we are okay. That we are loved and we do have value, because sometimes no one's ever told us that before, or sometimes our experiences sure say otherwise. And so it is hard to lean into that, but the reality is it's there even if you don't see it yet. And so I will tell my clients, I'm going to tell you 1,000 times you have value, and probably on the 995th time it'll stick, and that's okay. That might take that long. I think I was a slow learner, and it probably took 2,000 times. But eventually you'll believe it because it's true.
So good. You have to constantly remind people, right? You have to take the initiative to invest intentionally into their life, to remind them of their worth, of their value, of their identity, which is completely detached from their performance, right? It doesn't matter what's happened in the past. Think of Romans 11:29. The gifts and the calling of God on our life are irrevocable, right? It doesn't matter what our past looked like, the mistakes, the bad decisions, right? If God has called you to something, that is completely irrevocable. And so sometimes you just need someone like a Jason to step into your life to remind you of that worth and that value, which now kind of transitions us into the importance of relationship, right? Genesis 2:18, there was a shift in the narrative in Scripture from, the beginning times when God was forming everything and speaking everything into existence and creation, right? And after every day he would say, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. After he created man in the likeness of his own image, he said, and it was very good. But then there's an abrupt shift in Genesis 2:18 when it says, but the first time God said something was not good, when he says, for it is not good that man be alone. Clearly we were created and we all strive to love and to be loved, right? We want relationship. We want connection. But oftentimes, Jason, you see it all the time. I'm sure people come to you and they're wounded in attachment. They're wounded in relationship, and they don't know, in a sense, what to look for anymore in healthy and safe people because for whatever reason, they found themselves in this pattern of just like a dog running back to its old vomit, right? They run back to the same type of people who are continually just adding on to the wounds and the difficulties in their lives. What are some of the things that we can be looking for? Some of the characteristics of what it looks like to find someone who's safe, that we can actually be vulnerable with and kind of journey through life together.
Yeah, it's really important. And just kind of talking about what you're saying there, we do want that relationship. And for some of us, though, our experience with that has really been wounding, or we felt rejected. And so it's this very complicated, loaded thing. And it's sometimes people don't even know what to look for. They say like, I want a healthy relationship. I have no idea what that looks like. And so the reason that I talk about how to identify a safe person is, if we're not careful, what we do is we get some courage and we say, I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to have a conversation, and then we go and we pick the same type of person we've always picked, and we get rejected. And we say, see, this is why I don't do this. And so when we do that, the problem is we really set ourselves up for failure because we're going to the same person and getting the same response. Yeah. And so what we want to do differently is to try to identify someone who's safe. And by safe, I just mean someone who's available and willing to actually have the conversations with you, someone that listens, someone that, they don't have an agenda other than they just want to be there and be helpful to you. Someone that's walked some of this road out in some way in their life, so they actually have some experience to speak from. And someone that we can trust incrementally. So one of the other things that I tell people is, it is a mistake to just kind of say, well, I'm really struggling, I'm just going to vomit all this out and see what you do with it, right? So safe people, we just start slow and we build a relationship. And when we do that, we have lots of steps along the way to grow in confidence and grow in relationship to really sustain the support that we actually need to get better.
That's so good, man. What I would ask you then is, for, let's say, some of the people helpers, some of the counselors, some of the therapists that will be listening and watching this episode with us together, what are some of those steps that we can begin taking to allow and provide that safety and security, but then also to help people along the way? Maybe some techniques or strategies that you've learned, you found effective to help people really step out of the pit or really kind of move beyond the past and into that purpose and potential that you've been talking about this whole episode.
Yeah, I think what I often challenge a client to do is to think of someone who has loved them the best. So maybe it's not perfect, but think about in their history who has loved them in their mind the best. Maybe it was grandma, or maybe it was mom or dad, or whoever that was. And sometimes actually it's even just a pet. They might say, I think my dog loved me the best. Yeah. And so I'll say, well, tell me about that. What was it about that really made you feel loved? And do you have any of that in your life right now? Because if you do, or there's a person that immediately comes to mind, they're a great person to start with. So if someone's already loving you well, that's a great place to start. And maybe that person is the person. Maybe they're just a person who helps you get to the right person, but start there. I also think if we really want to practice how to do this, we can always do this with God. There's like this amazingly safe space where we're never going to be rejected. It's not going to be complicated. We can just show up and be honest. And so sometimes just praying that out, even if you don't have some big agenda or outline or know where you're going, just to say like, hey, God, here's where I'm at. Here's what's on my heart. I don't know what to do. Even that is very, very good practice for what we would do with a safe person. And so the more that we're doing that with God and feeling confident, the easier it is to actually walk that out in our life.
That's so good, because a lot of what you kind of reference in the book, especially toward the latter part, is this idea that many individuals, they struggle with self-acceptance and really breaking free from societal expectations. I always say that we live in a comparison-based culture that's built on perceived perfection, right? If you open up your phone, you go to Instagram or Facebook, it's like a highlight reel of somebody's life. A lot of people, I should say, not nobody, but most people aren't willing to share, the brokenness or the challenges and the difficulties they're going through. And to be honest with you, for some people, they share it too much, and it's like, okay, are you seeking attention? You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? But when we understand that we're trying to meet others' expectations, it can be a very empty place, Jason. So how can someone break out of, like you said, the person they think they should be and actually begin to embrace their authentic self? Like, do you have any other exercises or techniques maybe for the listener out there who's struggling with self-worth, with self-confidence, as to how they could, in a sense, grow and turn their past into what you call a superpower that can actually connect them with others in a healthy way?
Yeah, I think it's really hard if you've had to adapt a lot to then be clear about who you are. So if you've spent your whole life making it work, it's hard then to say, okay, well, now here's the microphone. Who do you want to be? It's like, well, I have no idea. Like, my whole life is spent trying to be whoever I needed to be. And so one of the things I would say is that sometimes it's going to be really hard to identify who we are, but it's not hard to identify who we aren't. And so if you don't know who you are today, like, that's totally okay. But can you start with who you're not? Yeah. Well, here's what I know, Jason. Like, I'm never probably going to be a guy that skydives. I'm a guy, that's probably not going to wear a suit to work every day. You can kind of start to walk through this list of the nots, and sometimes even doing that clarifies it. The other thing that I like to walk through with clients is if you have a day off, right, and you have nothing to do that day, who are you on that day? What is that person like? Well, I kind of get up and I have coffee, or I wear this, or I do that. That is oftentimes who we really are, right? So if we have a day where we can just be us, what does that look like, and how is that different than the life we're living?
So good, man. Even if you don't really know, a start. Yeah, even if you don't really know who you are, right? It's being able to identify and kind of recognize maybe who you're not, and just starting there, so that way they can begin to explore and continually enhance some of those ways in which they can start to find out who they are, rooted and anchored in their identity in this life. For you, Jason, spiritually speaking, I'm interested just in, I know you are unashamed of your faith in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I know that He has been somebody that has helped you step out of those pits in your own life. How difficult, in terms of when we go through hard times, is it for us to really invite God in? But once we do that, once we ask Him to be in the midst of our mess, to help our listeners understand just how transformative His love and His grace and His forgiveness can be to help us move beyond and step out of the past that may have been binding us for so much.
Yeah, my faith, I've wrestled with it. I came out of my childhood really questioning a lot of things, and quite honestly, just really angry with God. I was like, I got beef with you. We got problems, and so I think I did this thing where I just resisted that, even knowing, and I feel like I've just been so blessed, always knowing that's really where I needed to be. Yeah. And so the woundedness kind of overshadowed some of that. But as I grew and I started to get better, I started to wonder what it'd be like to let God in. And so for me, what that experience is like is I had felt like I was on this path and it was dark and I had just hoped to have a light. And it was like I let God in, and then I realized, I had a flashlight in my pocket the whole time.
That's right.
Like this whole time that I've just been desiring this light to help me see where I'm supposed to be going, I actually already had that. But in order to really receive that, I had to wrestle with some of my understanding of relationships. It's fascinating because I'll do these workshops and I'll talk to people about their relationship with their parents, and often specifically their relationship with their father. And they'll tell me about that, and I'll say, now tell me about your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And goodness, so many times that answer about how they view God has a lot to do with how they view their father.
That's right.
And so sometimes really accepting that relationship with God means doing some work on changing how we see God versus some people we've had in our life, because there is a difference. And I think if we're not intentional about that, we can kind of just generalize and say, well, this is going to be the same as it's always been, and it's not. And so doing that work allows us to accept the gift we've already been given. And I know for me, when I really accepted that, everything changed. And I don't say that as, hey, it's just an overnight deal. But when I really got to the place of accepting that love, my life looked different.
That's what it's about too, right? Experiencing that difference. And when your life begins to look different, when you begin to accept that love, like you said, it's not an overnight thing. It's not a snap of a finger thing. It's a daily choice. It's a daily process. That's what faith is. I think of Romans 7 with Paul, right? Why do I do the things I wish I wouldn't, yet not do the things that I wish I would, right? It's a daily fight against the flesh. But when we submit and surrender to that love, when we submit and allow God to extend that grace to us, and we actually are willing to receive and accept it, man, that's when things can actually begin changing, not just our perspectives in this life, but also in the way in which we view other people as well. Jason, again, from all of us here at the American Association of Christian Counselors, we're so thankful for you and just the incredible work that you continually do in countless individuals' lives, not just from a therapist's chair, but also in pouring back into like the next generation of therapists like myself. I'm completely indebted. I'm thankful for you and all that you're doing. But how we always love to close our episodes here on the Built Different podcast is by allowing our guests to, in a sense, have the mic to just share a pressing word that God has placed on their heart for such a time as this. So today, Jason, who I really want you to speak into, maybe the person who has taken and gleaned a lot from what you've already shared today, they're super interested in this whole process of just being able to push through and beyond their past and beyond their pain, but maybe they just find themselves stuck in their brokenness right here in this moment. Jason, what's the pressing word of just hope, encouragement, and motivation that you would leave with all of us today?
I think if you're in that spot, the first thing I would want to tell you is you're not alone, even though it feels that way. And I think anybody who's gone through some of these things has definitely felt like this is only me. And one of the most powerful moments when I work with a workshop or a retreat is to hear someone say, this is what I'm going through and it's only me. And then to see hands shoot up and 5 other people say, oh man, I thought I was the only one. And so if you're in this spot, I think I would just tell you, number 1, you're not alone. And number 2, there's a lot of hope. A lot of why I wrote this book, and a parable that really informed it for me was this man goes to a circus. He sees an elephant. The elephant is tethered to this stake with a small rope. And the man just can't understand how that's enough to hold the elephant back. And so he goes to the trainer and he says, how does that little rope hold that big elephant back? And he says, when that elephant was younger, that rope seemed a lot bigger. And so it worked to hold it back. But now it never learned. It doesn't know better. And so it still allows it to hold it back. And so the reason I wrote the book is because I know that with God, we can cut the rope.
That's right.
And instead of that being something that holds us back, it can be something that we carry with us to the life we're called to. And so I would just tell you there is so much hope for that. And it's more than just needing a pair of scissors, but it can be that process of how do we just look at what that rope is for us, because maybe that's a childhood experience or a broken marriage or a relationship or job, whatever that rope is in our life. How do we look at that? How do we cut it? And how do we start to move forward?
Isaiah 43, verses 1 and 2, right? Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, right? That idea that you are not alone, but also that idea that God never promised the absence of pain in this life, but he always promises his presence in the midst of your pain. With God, you can cut the rope. Jason, man, thank you so much just for your time, for your willingness to join us today, again, for all of the incredible things that you are continuing to do and throughout your personal and professional career. Let me end by asking this. Where can all of our listeners and viewers go to purchase or pre-order your book that'll be coming out here in just a few short weeks, but also just to learn more about yourself?
Yep, I've got a website, jasonvr.com, and then I'm on all socials. Instagram, I do daily tips and posts about relationships, and that's jason.vanruler. And then right now until October 10th, when the book and audiobook releases, I actually have a pre-order bonus. And so on that pre-order bonus, if you pre-order the book, I made a specific course for how do we really do change, how do we set ourselves up for that, and then I'm giving my Connected Couples course because let's be honest, when we get done with the book, we want to connect with people. So how do we do that better? And so that's something I'm offering right now too. But I would just say, Zach, I am grateful for my time with you today. This has been such a blessing for me to just even hear your words of wisdom and have this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I challenge all of our listeners and viewers, please go check out all the incredible things, all the incredible resources that Jason is offering. Be sure to take notes because this guy, I believe you're a game changer, you're a life changer, you're a world changer, Jason. So thank you so much for your time again. We appreciate you, brother.